This is Avocado Sprint 62 release meeting. As always, we'll go over all the actions and the tasks and the resulting features that will make Avocado 62. We'll take a look at the current work in progress items after that and look at what Avocado 63 will possibly end up being based on the work items we have assigned. So to do that, I'm going to share my screen and look at Trello. Can you see my screen, Lukasz? Just checking.
Yes.
All right, so the first item we have in done is...
Maybe you can like increase the font size a bit.
It's okay. 150 now. Okay, so the first item we have here in done is unification of Python 3 and Python 2 and code handling. So this is a late aspect of the Python 3 support, in that we have decided on how we want to define the default encoding that will be used by Avocado and by utilities, like string-related utilities in Avocado. At this point, we now have Avocado utils a string.default encoding and a lot of other activity that went on here with regards to allowing a default encoding and also to be resilient when it comes to presenting text that may not be completely supported by the current encoding. So there's a lot of activity here, as you can see from the number of pull requests. And the message here is that users writing tests should have a better experience when running tests in either Python 2 or Python 3 using the Avocado utilities. Let me readjust here. We were on done. So the next one, it has to do with a card that we had written about the asset fetcher. This was marked as one fix deprecated. We were considering changing the SHA algorithm, the hash algorithm from SHA-1 to something else because of the collisions. We decided not to do it this time for some reasons, and like including extra CPU usage, and also the fact that a lot of tests just specify the hash without the algorithm, and by changing the default, the hash would be always invalid. So it would break tests in such a way that the asset would never be retrieved. So we decided to not do this at this time. We had a card also marked as one fix deprecated, which was a failure to install 36 LTS on distros like Ubuntu. We just verified that we don't actually ship like pip packages. We had something, yeah, so we don't actually ship pip wheel packages to for the 36 release, even though it's an end of life release. We were following this issue, and it looks like the distribution itself has something wrong with regards to wheels, because it attempts to create wheels even though a wheel is not available on pip. So this was again marked as won't fix.
Yeah, basically there is a workaround. You just disable wheel packages and installs properly from pip. But we just got to this point and decided like not to attempt to fix it for all because it's already deprecated, and the reporter actually said that he's looking into 52 now.
Mm-hmm. Correct. So next one is an Avocado VT feature. Lukasz noticed that the timeout parameter, which is a core Avocado test feature, was not being respected on Avocado VT tests. And this pull request was sent and merged, which fixed that issue. So now timeouts should apply to Avocado VT tests. Yeah, basically a fix on Avocado VT. Earlier this sprint, we noticed that the VM image library was breaking when downloading Fedora 28 images. And the fact is that the naming of the directory structure changed from Fedora 27 to Fedora 28. So we had to adapt to that. That's a simple fix and should allow VM image users to fetch Fedora 28. Next one is also an Avocado VT card, and that is the Avocado VT loader. It now reports more verbose information on test discovery. This is especially useful when test discovery doesn't happen as a user suppose it would go. So
Basically,
Lukash is going
just
to give a quick.
basically, if you list verbosely avocado list boot, it shows you what it could be, and it says like that avocado can't find it, glib can't find it, Golang can't find it, robot can't find it, but avocado VT does. But previously, when you tried something like something which is not an avocado VT test, like boot some characters behind, you would get just the glib Golang robot, but you wouldn't get the information why it's not a VT test. So this is this minor change, but why is it important? Because VT is quite complex, and you might actually try for example, using a boot test, but an incorrect binary, and then you had no information about the failure because those failures were silently ignored and never reported. So now you get like quite informative note that the binary you provided is not valid, or you may want to try a VT config and like use a broken file, and now you get actually the error where it happens and on which line, etc. And those informations are pretty essential when like debugging what's going on. So yeah, until now you had to do it manually, but now you can use the -v or minus verbose to get the details from VT to see what's broken or what's going on. Why is your test not being discovered? I can even probably remove that. And yes, you get the string expected as well.
Nice.
Okay.
And it just happens that one of our users actually used this quite recently, and he was using a wrong binary. So quite appropriate example there.
That's where it comes from. At least the binary, not the motivation.
Yeah. So next one is an Avocado Vert card. It has to do with SSH handling and Fabric and everything else. I'll leave to Lukash.
Basically, we already discussed this last sprint, but the good news now is that Fabric new Fabric version was released, and this should be fixed. So do update your Fabric, but beware, there is Fabric 2.0 as well, and Fabric 2.0 is not compatible with Avocado. We already have this tackled in our requirements, but in case you do it manually, use Fabric lower than 2.
Mm-hmm. There's supposedly API breakage on.
Yeah, I mean, Fabric 2 is complete rework. We will be looking into it eventually, but at this point, the Fabric 1 and Fabric 2 are going to be maintained for a short period. So we still are gonna use like depend on Fabric 1 until we are ready. And Fabric 2 is ready because Fabric 2 is really an early stage right now.
Mm-hmm. Good deal. Next one, Fedora 28 deprecation warning breaks tests. So basically, this is kind of a packaging fix, but also important to mention because depending on how you're using Python on Fedora 28, you may be aware that by calling Python instead of Python 2 or Python 3, you get extra text printed out to your screen, so to your standard output. So there are a few ways to work around this. We did a fix here, which included some other packaging fixes, and this should bring us to Fedora 28 packages on this release. So this was breaking a few self-tests and impacting the packaging. Next one is also development environment fix. So we used to use the old cheroot style when doing make RPM. So we would call mock with the old cheroot. This was once necessary right after it was introduced. The new cheroot was introduced, but it isn't needed anymore. So we are dropping that. Next one was a fix on the tabular output utility function. So if you are relying on the output that Avocado generates, or even if you're relying on the utility function itself, you now not find empty characters after the last characters on a line. So it's hard to demonstrate it here, but suppose you have like 3 columns like this. Previously, you would have empty characters at the end. That was a small little fix, and now you can, if you had no, like in this example, if you have no tags applied to those characters, you still have empty tags up to the tag. So this is fixed on the utility library and automatically on the output that Avocado generates. Next one is basically a check that we got some activity. It's kind of a milestone card on Avocado VT. So at this point, we have already dropped Python 2.6 support, and Avocado VT is 2.7 now and close to being Python 3 compatible as well. So we had this card about dropping 2.6 support, and it happened, and it's now Python 2.7. So it happened on an earlier release. This card was also fixed on a previous release, so we're just pushing the updates here. Basically, we used to have pretty ugly code when it comes to gathering the list of data files that would be packaged in Avocado. We dropped all that. So if you look at our setup.py now, it is a bit nicer than it used to be. Next one was we synced the partial release changes from documentations from 56 all to 60. So now we are keeping those updated. So on this release, you should expect the LTS relevant changes to also make into that release. All right, so this is what was done on this release, and we have a number of cards in work in progress. I'll go from bottom to top and explain stuff that we will definitely get finished and merged before we tag this release. The first ones are issues that are tied to one another. So I've noticed that CPU utilities and self-tests are somewhat broken on, not somewhat, like the self-tests are definitely broken, and the CPU utilities could use some changes to play better on Python 3. The self-tests actually do not even, the modules do not even load because there is import string IO, which is Python 2 only. And answering the question on how this actually got to this point, since we have checks on Travis for Python 2 and Python 3, it seems that there's something wrong with the way we check the parallel tests, because we are not getting errors from failures to load tests. So this is something we have to take a look at. In this particular case, test U2 CPU could not be loaded, and still we considered all the self-tests passed. So we have to take a look at what's going on in Travis with our self-tests. Lukash is working on this minor issue. It should be a simple fix, but it's something that affects when you run Avocado on really constrained environments such as containers. Um, any extra words about it, Lukash?
Yeah, basically, yeah, it was introduced by the logging refactor, and I'm still working on whether to fix it like once for all, or in paginator, like whether paginator should support running
Less.
without less, or uh, or whether it should not support that and not be called at all, which I think should be the proper fix.
All right, good deal. Next one is the removal of, I'll talk about the two cards at once. So the removal of both data.dir and source.dir, those two test properties. So if you're writing an Avocado test, your test class would have access to those two properties. Source.dir, we decided that it was not useful enough to be justified, because we do have work there, which is a temporary directory that users can use to do whatever they want. Source dir, it's actually a directory inside work dir, and it's basically a legacy pattern assumption property name from very old days, like from Autotest days. So we decided to drop this. If your test used to use source dir to say untar tarballs and compile stuff, you should already be getting notifications and deprecation warnings since 2 releases ago. And now is the time that we are gonna remove them, so your test will fail if you're using source dir. With regards to data.dir, the same thing applies with regards to deprecation. It has been deprecated for 2 releases, and now we're going to remove it. The data.dir property had a limitation, which was to only know about a data directory for that was relative to a file. So if your test had no file, or if your test had multiple tests in a single file, which is common when you have a class and multiple test methods, you would be limited by a single directory. So that was replaced for get data, which is an API, test API, which knows about variants and knows about test methods, and it knows about the file, and allows different data for different tests or different variants. So if you're still using data.dir, your test will fail after this gets merged. So please resort to use get data instead. And again, those properties, those features were already deprecated, so it should be no surprise. Next work in progress card is allow assets with the same file names to be fetched and cached. So this pull request was, it contained a bunch of fixes and refactors, but in the end, the one relevant change that matches the card name and description was that if a user was fetching a file with the same name from 2 different locations, and one had a hash and the other one didn't have a hash, we would have conflicts in the cache directory. So if this file was fetched first and the hash actually matched, this file would be preserved. And when a second test asked for VM Linux and had no hash whatsoever, this second file would be returned to fetch asset callers. So in the end would be returning the wrong file to a user, even though the URL is different. And the reason for this is that fetch asset has two ways to be used. And the first one is where you only give a file name, and the second one, and you can get it from a number of possible locations. And the second way is when you give it a URL like this. So we are now discussing if this implementation, kind of like a simple way to solve this problem, is the way to go, or if we want to make a more database-like or more structured-like approach to the cache directory. So it's still considered a work in progress item, even though a bunch of stuff already happened.
Yeah, by the way, we plan to tackle this early in the next sprint. So if you have any recommendations or like use cases, uh, feel free to share them, because originally this was supposed to be a feature. For example, you meant to download LTP from one source or another source in a different tests, and they would download, I mean, they wouldn't be downloaded twice, but I mean, it's the same name, so let's go with that. But over the time, it became a constraint, and now we're trying to address that.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we have two new cards which are Avocado related, but not really tied to the Avocado release. Still, we do think that those will make it out today, so we'll probably consider them as part of this sprint. The first one was a contribution for another test. By the time it was the only test, and then we got a new one, which is nice. So this adds a basic client spawn test. So we have now kind of unit functional test for a expect itself. It enables those in Travis, those tests in Travis. And after that, we want to also release a new version of AExpect. So those two are pretty close to completion and should be done on this day. Next one is Avocado utils archive at uncompress if necessary. So this came from a user request. Basically, when you get a file and you just want to transparently get the output, the real content, be it compressed or not, we noticed that this could probably be built on top of the isArchive function of our own Avocado utils archive module. I had a proof of concept that added this, so pure gzipped or bzipped files should also be supported transparently here. And there was also something that was posted as a proof of concept, which was to kind of tie together uncompressing and downloading files. But this is probably a topic for another moment when we have a pull request out there. So basically, we're trying to tackle use cases where users want to both download archives, have the asset fetcher functionality to cache those, and at the same time uncompress files that are inside those downloaded archives, and at the same time still deal with caching of those. So we are working on those ideas and those features. Next one is defaults to recursive. This is a long time feature that we would really want to get in Avocado by now, and Lukash worked a bit on this. You want to give a status report here, Lukash?
Yeah, basically, I have the patches to enable it by default, but I have some doubts about how ready the recursive tag is. because I notified like several malfunctionings, like not really critical when it's specified by a tag, but when it's by default, then it wasn't really that useful. So I plan to create really good unit tests and to address all of these to be ready before we switch to recursive by default.
Yes. And just to be clear about what this is about, is suppose you're building classes on top of Avocado test with your own test framework logics in it. So the logics about the software you're testing. Uh, right now, you need to say Avocado recursive or Avocado enabled to have those tests be seen by the Avocado test runner. And what we want to do is have that by default, so there will be no uh, way to distinguish or no extra step necessary if you're running uh, like when compared to say Python unit tests. So we don't load test code until we get to the point of running it, but still we need to find it. So this would allow the same experience with the extra security feature of not loading test code until you ask to run it. Next one is Avocado util service. Thread and even multi-access safe. Make it multi-thread and multi-access safe. So basically, a user reported that
In
the code
fix,
in fix, yeah.
basically a library we're having, and yeah, I still need to do a review, but hopefully it will get there eventually.
Mm-hmm. So it has to do with reentrancy of the library. Basically, it's one per interpreter at this point, right?
Yes.
All right, next one is another chapter in the Unicode fixes. We still have a few issues on the YAML to MOOCs on with Unicode characters. So not sure if you have updates, Lukash.
And not on this one. We have the other card. Oh, we moved it to done, right? But basically, we addressed the uh, process library. So until now, the process library usually use the ASCII by default unless you specified encoding. Uh, in this release, we switched to our AXpect encoding, which is the default encoding usually obtained from locals, get preferred encoding. So it on modern systems, it's basically UTF-8.
Mm-hmm.
But also it respects encoding, yeah, like user local encoding it, so it would be CP 1250 on Windows XP or ISO on Linux.
Mm. Yeah, and the next
I
step
mean,
is
amongst the other issues like solved in that library in order to support it properly.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, so now I can actually start working on this.
Good deal. Next one is a low-hanging fruit, and it's about moving the whiteboard test example to self-test data. Basically, that example is more um it's more of a test that we should and we are running, so they should be and not much an example to users. So we are moving that to self-test data. We already have a pull request out there, and we just noticed that we don't need the YAML file anymore since you're not presenting it to users. So we should get rid of that as well. Improve test status. There was some brainstorm here on what to do on this card. There's still some discussions to go on. So for now, it's still here as work in progress. Python 3 functional test checklist. So this is one of the cards that we had a lot of activity already on, and it covered a bunch of functional tests that were still marked as skipped on Python 3. And those two actually map to the card that we just mentioned about Unicode and YAML to MOOCs. So expect to have those tests unskipped when Unicode is fixed for YAML to MOOCs in the card that we just visited. Next is two cards about PICT. For those who don't follow, PICT is combinatorial independent testing tool. It happens that there is some breakage in it, in the upstream project, when it comes to opening files in different encodings in different systems. So especially on Linux systems, when trying to use white characters to detect the encoding, it breaks, so it needs a new code on that. The author has suggested that either a simplification of the code or just an explicit setting should be given. So this is being worked on upstream. And once that is fixed and we get to run the self-test on PICT, then we can propose it to Fedora and EPEL, because right now the tests do not pass because of this breakage. At least this breakage, there may be more. So the last card we have in work in progress is Avocado VT, add Avocado and other requirements. Basically, this is about allowing easier installation from source and from pip and from standard Python methods of Avocado VT. And Locage has a version that needs to be resent, right?
Yeah, just rebase, check whether there are not like minor tweaks, and yeah, rebase and send again.
Okay. And just as a comment, because we are talking about work in progress tasks, the core team, people that follow this meeting closer will notice that the core Avocado team is at this point slightly shorter. We are actively looking for a candidate to join the team. So Red Hat sponsors most of the project. So if you go to jobs.redhat.com and search for Avocado, you'll find a position for the Vert team to work on Avocado. So if you're an Avocado user, an Avocado hacker, and you feel like you could enjoy working on this team, please go ahead and take a look at the job opening. And there's also another announcement here, which is related to Avocado and how some of that activity is happening related to Avocado, but not directly here. So if you are following, if you follow virtualization development, especially QEMU, you'll find that Avocado is being proposed as a kind of a framework for functional acceptance tests there. So this is kind of a complement to Avocado VT, but it's something that it's specific to QEMU, and it's going to map quite closely the QEMU upstream source code with functional tests. So it's in my understanding, is pretty close to be merged on upstream QEMU. So if you want to take a look at examples of how you can do functional tests for your own software using Avocado, that may be a good example. All right, so when it comes to the sprint backlog, so just to make it clear, we are going to iron out a few issues here, those last minute issues that we caught, and then we're gonna release Avocado 62 possibly later today. And after that, we'll be left with the work in progress tasks we just mentioned, and then we're gonna complement that with the sprint backlog items and work, as we have just mentioned, that is probably being going to be influenced by users and Avocado QEMU upstream work. So this is why we have such a short sprint backlog board. Any questions, further comments? So just a quick look at what we have here. We have Avocado Check PR. This is a card that was kind of an experimentation of my own to use a contrib script that Lukash contributed. I have to double check how it's working. It was not working out of the box for me. The next one is a much larger card, which is about to enable all the warning checks on our own code. So we will be picking from those from this list and creating cards as we enable those warning checks and improve the overall quality of the code. The test loader is we want to move it to the new plugin architecture, so test loaders would show up when you do Avocado plugins, and they would just use the more natural plugin framework we already have. Get CPU arc, obsolete get CPU arc and add two functions. This has to do with CPU models and CPU architectures, which on some cases are different. And right now we kind of do our best to return the best naming. So we would revisit this. And this is also bug without a easy quick fix. So two attempts have already been made, but they require changes to the test runner and to the general way we communicate with test process. So we have to revisit this as well. So this is the end of the Sprint backlog view. We already have a new name for the new release, which is Greed in the Sun. We'll follow up with information on that. A card on the Sprint team, and we will announce on the mailing list when the release is made and when packages are available. I guess that's all. Any further comments or questions? No? All right, thank you very much, and expect Avocado 62 to be released in a few. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.